I am a service design consultant at, Capita now. It was originally known as Orange Bus. Was one of the sort of leading design agencies in the Northeast. We had the biggest UX capability outside of government there. So there's quite a lot of government bases in the Northeast. There's sort of DWP and HMRC are based there as well. They have their delivery centres there. But outside of that kind of government space, Orange Bus had that kind of, that big UX capability. So my role there is basically to be the one that goes in and understand what the problem is that a client has. So we work across multiple sectors, lots of varied industries and different clients with different problems. And I think what we often find is clients come to us with either a predefined solution, or they come to us with a problem that they think they have. But my job is to kind of get in there and have those early conversations and deep dive a little bit into their organisation to see, is that actually the right problem that we should be solving? Often clients get sort of very pent up on what they think an issue is, and it's often not quite the case. So that's a really big part of my role, as well as working with lots of different disciplines. So user researchers, business analysts, designers, tech consultants, to be that person who kind of brings or knows what skills basically need to be brought in to help solve that problem, and connect the dots and the different moving parts of a service design project. I think looking at the sort of end-to-end experience of a service and that whole front end and back end is quite a big beast at times, and it needs people to be kind of coming in and out at different points. So my role is to kind of be the one that works with the client throughout the process to bring it all together and to look at where the opportunities are. In the last couple of years as well, I've moved into a people manager role at Orange Bus. So I'll kind of work in a mentorship role with sort of less experienced designers and researchers to kind of help them achieve their goals and set personal objectives, and work with them on where they want to get in their careers as well. So that's part of my job that I really enjoy. So today I'm going to be sharing with you my experiences of remote working pre-COVID, because that's definitely an element of our job that we had to deal with anyway, but also how we've been affected since the pandemic as well. And I know you're sort of planning your final projects this year, so I've put a bit of a toolbox together for sort of looking at approaches, but really drilling down into problem solving within those approaches. So you might have got a plan already and it might not quite go to plan, or you might want to think about, what would your backup plan be if there's risks associated with it and things don't quite go as expected. So that's mainly what I'm going to be focusing on today. I'll just give a little sort of intro to my sort of career path and how I sort of got where I am right now, because it's not necessarily a traditional path. So when I started university, I actually studied English language and literature. I had no idea that the UX discipline even existed. I hadn't really heard of service design, or I wasn't very familiar with the different sort of disciplines that make up a digital or a design or service design project. It was all very new to me. It wasn't sort of something we were introduced at school. We didn't have coding then or anything. It was much more focused around the traditional disciplines with a sort of career advice that we were given at the time. So I thought I was quite interested in moving actually into maybe journalism, or I really enjoyed reading and sort of creative writing. So maybe I would go into a sort of arts path perhaps. So when I finished university, I actually began working for a company called Flow Culture, which was a very small startup. There were just 5 of us, I think, at the time. We eventually grew to 10 just before I left as well. And what I did there was, it was mainly a sort of audience, sort of arts research and consultation practice. So they would work with arts and museums venues to sort of develop kind of educational projects and projects that aimed to engage young people or different audiences with the venue, and kind of sort of facilitate social inclusion and kind of giving people different opportunities. And we also did a lot of research as well. So that's where I trained up on sort of qualitative research as well. A few sort of key projects. We did some audience consultation for the British Science Festival and the National Trust as well. But one of the really interesting ones was a series of reports commissioned by the Arts Council, or Arts Council England. And that was all about, there'd been a series of, sort of funding cuts to the arts and culture industry at the time. So it was looking at what the impact of that was on the industry, and particularly around young people and their access to arts and culture as a result of those cuts. So that was really interesting. But then the lady who set that company up, she was really interested in technology and how that could be used as an enabler to engage more people with the industry. So we kind of pivoted, and I think because we were such a small company, it was easier to do that. It was a very new sort of startup company, and we'd gone down that research path mainly because of the founder's sort of main experience. But she was really interested in pursuing this avenue. So it was a really interesting time to kind of be there at the start of something and kind of navigate that together as a small team, and take the learnings from that. So we moved into a more digital space, and we recruited user interface designers and a couple of developers as well, and worked with them to create a product that aimed to, it's sort of like a mobile a platform that enabled arts and cultural venues to create mobile content. And we also explored using Bluetooth beacons as well. So as people moved around a venue, they'd get sort of specific content related to that exhibition that was in that particular room. So that was really interesting to work on, and sort of exposed me more to the digital industry and the different disciplines that make that up. So then moved over to Orange Bus, which basically enabled me to get a much a bigger grasp. I think working at Flow Culture, it was really great in some ways because it was so hands-on, and it was very much, you were dipping in and out of a lot of different things. I'd get experience of, I might be working with clients to figure out what it was that they needed. I might be, looking at the resource and the project plan and deadlines and budgets. I might be sort of on the site, on the venue, looking at how people were using that product and getting feedback back from that. So using some of those research skills as well. And it was very, very varied, and it enabled me to kind of try out a lot of different things and figure out what I was good at and what I was interested in as well. But I suppose the disadvantage was, because we were such a small team, the sort of learning opportunities were limited maybe. I wasn't able to kind of pick up off other people's expertise and really learn from that. So going to Orange Bus basically enabled me to do that. It had a much more mature UX capability. There were lots of different disciplines associated with that I was exposed to. So not just having, UX, but actually having the user interface design, maybe a generalist UX designer, but also specialist user researchers and content designers as well. So seeing all the different facets of it and the different specialisms was really interesting. And then also just getting to work on much more varied projects as well. And also obviously introducing me to service design. So some of the kind of key projects from my time at Orange Bus were working on, Barber. So that was a CMS that we built for them. We did a few projects with Jules where they were much more around the kind of audience engagement side. So we made a series of apps for them. One was like a welly app, Jules Wellies. So you could kind of design your own wellies in that app, and there was a competition that they ran alongside it. They also had like a storybook app as well. And then Direct Line Group, for them, we were moving a service that they already had. So that was a kind of fleet service where they'd sell insurance to like taxi firms, for example, who have multiple cars to insure. But they had that service offline, but they wanted to kind of digitize that. So we supported them to digitize their fleet offering. And then Orange Bus was acquired by Capita, and we've kind of disbanded that brand, or we're in the process of disbanding at the moment. I'm still in the habit of saying I work for Orange Bus, definitely. But that sort of enabled us to work on a lot more sort of complex projects on a larger scale. So one of the most interesting projects I've probably worked on in my career is the Financial Services Compensation Scheme, which you might not be familiar with, but if you have a banking app on your phone and you click on that, a lot of the time the FSCS protected logo pops up. So they basically, they offer that protection. So if a bank or building society goes into administration, they basically protect your money if that organisation's registered with them. And also they protect your money if you were given bad advice from a financial advisor. You can make a claim with them basically. But their problem is that there's a lot of organisations like claims management companies that you might have seen. There's a whole thing around, was it PPI cover over the last sort of 5 or 10 years, where there was a lot of adverts or people cold calling and saying that they could help you claim your money back for that. But obviously they would take a proportion of the compensation that you got back. So a lot of people didn't actually realise you could do that for free, just directly through the FSCS. So that was really interesting, just looking at their entire end-to-end journey, from what happens before you need to claim, and what's going on there. Why do people need to claim in the first place, and how do they become aware of FSCS? What's their relationship with a claims management company if they go down that route, and how does the experience change? And it was interesting working with quite vulnerable customers as well. So FSCS, they call the claimants customers because they want to treat them in that way. They want to give them that experience and not treat them any differently. I think that there was definitely a culture in the organisation of being like, oh well, this is a last resort. They don't have any choice. The users don't have any choice but to go through us. We're sort of doing them a favour. There was a bit of kind of that negative culture within the organisation. So FSCS were really keen to turn that around and get people to see the users as customers and someone that they should really value and give a really positive experience to. So we were moving them into that customer-centric mindset, which was really, really interesting to work on. So that's kind of my career journey. So moving back to remote working, I got massively sidetracked there. So this was the office environment that we left behind in mid-March. As you can see, it's very open plan. It's very collaborative, full of lots of wall space, post-it notes, spaces where we can come together socially to kind of knowledge share. Also space for workshops with clients, journey mapping on walls. It's just a very, very collaborative environment. I know there's not a picture of any desks there, but obviously we do have desks, but they tend to be organised in sort of squad arrangements. So we try where possible to have project teams sat together. So the user researcher, UX designer, creative designer, developers, QA, DevOps, if we have those involved as well. We'll all sit together so that they can ask each other questions as needed and just work together much more collaboratively, rather than having people sat in different teams. And that was something we went quite back and forth on. We used to have people sat in teams, and we've been moving more to this kind of squad setup. And I think there's arguments both ways. On one hand, if you sat with your team, you're able to use the knowledge around you and sort of sense check things with other subject matter experts. But then if you sat with your project team, it just means that you're able to collaborate and move a project forward a lot faster as well. So I think there's pros and cons to both. But generally, it was a very kind of face-to-face interactive, collaborative environment. So it was quite a change for us when we did move to a fully remote setup. So this is definitely not a scientific diagram, so don't take a screenshot of this. But this is kind of how it felt moving through into a more sort of remote setup. So at first, this was kind of mid-March time. We were hearing on the news that we might have to work from home, and we were sort of, oh, when are we going to do this? Are we going to move fully remote? When will we shut the office? There was a lot of anticipation around it, and also probably a bit of excitement as well. It was quite an unusual situation, quite like the novelty factor. And I think people sort of, when it did happen, it all happened quite quickly. Some people grabbed like monitors as well as their laptops and keyboards and like a mouse and things like that. Others just left thinking, oh, we'll be back in 2 weeks. And we didn't really know what was going on. So in terms of disruption, it did hike up quite quickly. Within, I think, the first sort of couple of weeks, people were just not really knowing how to operate. How many calls should we be having? You know, like what is our new routine? Just quite distracted from their project work, like trying to work on projects, but it definitely took like a bit of bedding in time. So the first couple of weeks were quite strange, and I think we probably over-egged the communication as well. So we were because we're such a close-knit office environment, and we're very supportive and collaborative anyway. We have like regular weekly meetings together where we spend time knowledge sharing, or we have the week ahead on a Monday. I think people were very keen to keep that connection and that culture going. So as well as our week ahead meeting on a Monday and our end of day Friday meeting or end of week meeting, we also started having these kind of like daily morning catch-ups, but then other team members were putting catch-ups in as well for like the specific UX team. And then as people managers, we were putting meetings in with people. So it just meant that your day was full of disjointed little meetings, and we'd basically try to over support each other really, which was meaning we'd just got like remote call fatigue, or Zoom call fatigue, as some people call it. So the distraction level just hiked up, and people were like, I've not got time to think and like actually do my work because I'm constantly on calls now. Then I think that started to settle down. We kind of learned from that and moved into a better way of working and supporting each other. But there was also other issues to deal with, like the technology not quite working, or like people having back pain. I was talking about earlier with Jonathan, not having like the right chair in place, and just things that you wouldn't necessarily think of straight away that had quite a big impact. And also some people just really don't like not working in an office. They miss having that human connection and being able to kind of have that journey to work where they've got their thinking time and then moving back. So it's been really interesting looking at how different people have reacted, and people's different takes and sort of coping mechanisms, or some people have absolutely loved it. So it would be a really good study actually to do, like how people have reacted to this and what different people's needs are in a remote working environment. And then we're sort of moving below the disruption curve now. So I think after 3 months of doing this, people very much have their new routines in place. We've kind of gone through a few situations that typically we would have to do in person, like running a workshop with a client, for example. We would pretty much always do that in person normally. We'd travel down to the client, or they would come to us. And I think there's been like the odd occasion where we have done it remotely, but it's been like a very specific circumstance. And it's not something we would normally do, but we've got those things under our belt now. We've taken our learnings from it. So we know that we can do it and we can still get a good outcome from it. And we're starting to just kind of get into our new routines, and everyone's sort of settled down and feeling a lot happier with the situation, I think. So some things that we learned was, at first, we definitely had the tools in place already to work remotely. So this wasn't a tough thing for us. We'd already got these things set up. We'd got shared document stores, so things like Google Drive or Microsoft Teams. I think anyway, we had all of that information shared so that we were able to kind of share knowledge and project information very easily with each other. Especially if you're doing things like you're traveling to meet a client, you want to be able to access those documents on the train as well, on the way down there, and maybe do some work. We also have people based in Newcastle, but London and Edinburgh as well. So being able to share documents and work on them collaboratively was really important anyway for us. So as long as I've worked at Orange Bus, we've always been doing that. Also video conferencing, that was something that we've always had. We used to use Google Hangouts previously for many years, and then we've recently moved over to Teams just because of the acquisition with Capita, basically. Also online chat, so we use Slack for that. You can also use Teams as well, but that was something that we regularly did anyway, so that didn't feel strange at all. And then I think that the hardest thing was definitely, we have a lot of kind of wall space work that we do. So like moving away from that, we already used Miro before. I think in the office, wall space is definitely a premium. There's a lot of different project teams who are kind of wanting a wall of their own, and the project might go on for months as well. So you don't always have a wall to work with when you're on a project. So especially well, for us on the FSCS project, we were actually using Miro already for that, purely because we'd got a business analyst who was based in Edinburgh, and it just meant that we were able to access our work and share our work together, like wherever we were. So we didn't have to have Becky, who was our BA, coming down to the office all the time. She could just come down like every couple of weeks. And then we could work together on the Miro board and just have a conversation like this. So again, that was something that was fine for us. And then we also had the security and the VPN set up. So I actually don't know what a VPN stands for, so don't ask me that. But it basically is something that we're able to connect to access sort of more private data for the company. So it means that we are we're able to access that information remotely, but it's still all secure and it's not. Something just popped up. Has someone got a question? Oh, there we go. Virtual private network. Thank you for that. So yeah, we're still able to access all of that securely and remotely. And that was all in place before. It was something that Capita had in place. So we didn't have any concerns there. So basically, we had everything you need to work remotely, and we were used to doing that, but it was more the kind of the nuances of what's the quality and how does that change our kind of collaborative way of working and ways of doing things. And I think it's not as kind of black and white as we can do it, so we should do it all of the time. So in terms of the positives, which there definitely have been a lot of positives that have come out of lockdown. So the work-life balance for me certainly, and I know a lot of colleagues as well have definitely experienced this. It's gotten rid of that commute for us. So that wasn't like a massive deal for me. I live quite close to the centre, so it was kind of like maybe a 40-minute journey or something like that, getting to work and then 40 minutes back, which isn't massive, but I think it's just sort of given me more energy. I think I always felt like I was going somewhere or like in a rush, and I'd kind of leave work feeling tired, and the things that I wanted to do after work, like maybe, doing a course or something, or going to the gym, I'd always sort of talk myself out of it. I would do it still, but I'd have to like really talk myself into doing it. And it was very easy to say like, oh, well, the weather's not very good tonight, so I'm not going to go to the gym. Even though I always felt like energized and better for doing it, it'd just be too easy to kind of, I'd just be like feeling tired and, I can't be bothered to do that. So sometimes I wouldn't, whereas now I've found that I've got in this routine and I can very easily just, like finish off, close the door, go upstairs, and then just get on with it. And I don't have that kind of like lack of motivation and tiredness feeling. Also, yeah, I think that sort of links to the, I've put the slow movement on there as well. I don't know if anyone's come across this. I've got a little quote there from the sort of founder of the idea, but it's all about sort of moving to more mindful living. So not having that pressure to do everything as fast as possible and fit as much in, but more stepping back and thinking about what do we actually value and what's actually important to us. So I think being able to work remotely and have this time spent in lockdown in general, it's kind of given us that headspace to think about what is it that we value, and what are the things that we've really missed that we've not been able to do, and what are the things that actually we did do but it's not really made that much of an impact to our lives. So that's been quite an interesting thing to sort of reflect on. And then we've also got overhead costs on there as well. So for the business, I mean, we are paying rent at the moment still, even though we're not in our building. But you know, potentially if we did move to more of a remote setup, maybe we would rent a smaller space, more for like collaboration, if we all came back into the office to collaborate on a specific project, or as an entire business to come together and like either socially or knowledge share, or get an update from the business or something like that. But maybe we wouldn't need as big a space and as many kind of permanent desks in there. So it could have an impact there. Also thinking about the regional economy as well. So potentially there could be more impacts or the more opportunities basically for people and for businesses to kind of attain talent outside of some of the kind of major cities. So people not feeling like, very talented people not feeling like they have to go to London or somewhere to like get that that level of opportunity. Maybe they can access opportunities that are equally as good, but still living further afield. And also sort of, I think it's a really interesting effect on the sort of suburbs outside of cities as well. So certainly like where I live, people have started kind of going for the coffees more locally and just sort of like spending more time in their local environments and like little bakeries and things. So it could be interesting how, like, what does this mean for cities in the future? Are they going to become more kind of like experience zones where we have like the theatres and cinemas maybe, but then there's much more of that kind of locality in the suburbs that had kind of gone away and gone to the cities before. Environmental impacts as well. So I've definitely not been using public transport, which I used to do all of the time, and I've been using my car, like I think I've filled it up once or twice in the entirety of lockdown. So that's like could have positive impacts for the environment as well. But then just generally like working from home as well, I have a ginger cat and it's just been really nice to spend more time with him. And I know people can probably relate if they've got children or families, they're spending more time with them at home. And it's just kind of nice to have that bit of extra time, and it can just be a bit de-stressing as well to just like spend some time playing with your cat or your dog, and just like getting that headspace and stepping away for a bit. Although I think children can also be on the other end of the scale and be a bit of a distraction as well. So the challenges then, and there have been lots of challenges. So firstly, team collaboration is definitely a big one. I think even though it's definitely been possible to do, and I think tools like Miro and obviously video conferencing have made that a lot more possible, it's still just, you just don't get that same team feeling from being there and kind of just getting your heads together, and you know, just the physicality of like sketching things out or connecting things up. It just misses something, some sort of human interaction and that kind of creative energy, I think, and that sort of buzz from working on something together, I think is definitely missing. Undertaking research as well as being a challenge. That's something that we do a lot of remote research at Orange Bus, actually, which I'll come on to a bit later. But that is, I think, like when you think about budgets, like client budgets and things like that, it's something that you have to do, but you miss out on those nuances. You kind of only see half the picture. So like actually seeing somebody using a product or a service in the setting that they would actually use it, you just pick up on their body language, and it's just really interesting to see like what they have around them. Things that you wouldn't necessarily think are relevant can actually have a big impact on those insights. So you're still getting a lot of insight there, but you feel like you're missing out on the richness of the data that you could have. Culture and connection as well. So this is a big one for Orange Bus, actually. Like we do have a very connected culture. We work together very, very closely, especially the different teams. Like the UX team is, it meets every month, comes together to talk about the projects that we're working on, or share some skills and knowledge with each other, run like interactive sessions. We have like a sort of social on a Friday at 4 o'clock every week as well. And it's, I think, just like, going in the kitchen and having a conversation and just having that moment of connection and lightness in the day. I think it can be quite easy to, I've got like distractions down there, because definitely, you can get distracted working remotely, especially if you've got kids and family, sort of in and out of the room and stuff like that. But also I think you can go the other end of the scale and just be like very focused on what you're doing. You're just sort of there working on it by yourself, and it's really easy to just get very sucked into that and not have that human connection and lightness to the day that you would normally if you were kind of walking around the office or working on something with somebody. You would have those moments where you're kind of like having a bit of a gossip or a joke around or something like that, and that just is missing. And then obviously we've got everything else that's going on in the world as well. So not only are we sort of dealing with like working in a new way, but also there's the potential stress from the pandemic. You don't know who is impacted by it, who's fortunate enough not to have been, or to have known someone that has been. But yeah, it can be quite stressful, like getting used to an entire new way of operating in all walks of life. So from going to the supermarket to talking to someone who maybe has had a family member that's been affected by it. And also everything that's going on with the economy at the moment as well. I think it's an incredibly stressful time at the moment for businesses. And although we've kind of reached that point in the curve where we're getting into our new routines now, and we're getting used to this way of working, it's still a lot of stress to deal with coming at you from all different angles. And it might have a longer term impact as well on, what job opportunities are coming up. And it's a lot to kind of deal with, I think. So yeah, I've kind of covered on some of this already, but I think there's a lot of unintended consequences as well. So I think it's very easy to sort of jump to that thing of, oh, we can work remotely, this is going to be amazing, because it's going to bring so much more opportunity to different regions, and people are going to have access to so many more opportunities, which I think there's totally the potential for that to be the case. But I think we just need to be mindful of what the knock-on impact might be. So things like mental health, we're already started to see a little bit of this in Orange Bus, people feeling very disconnected, and it's bringing out sort of symptoms of their mental health as well. Also impact on early careers. So especially in my role as a people manager, I work with quite a few young people that have just sort of moved into their career, or they've transitioned into a new role. which is very common as well. People starting off their careers in one role and then actually finding that they're really interested in something else, so wanting to move in and transition, but not having that, not being able to kind of build those connections and those networks with people when you're in your early career. You kind of rely on that from in terms of like learning from other subject matter experts and developing your skills. It's much easier to do that when you're working with someone. If it's not like a, you know, it's not like a sit down course, it's more like you're learning from shadowing and interacting with people on a project who are more experienced than you. It's really quite important to be with them, I think. And also just developing kind of wider networks anyway, and wider connections for your future career as well is quite useful. Potential regional impacts. I actually cannot remember what I meant by that. I think what I meant is the impact on the region. We might think that that's a good thing if it's opening out opportunities, but actually could it have a knock-on effect for investment in the region as well? So you kind of, there's a whole thing of like wanting to move businesses out of London and Manchester in England, for example, and put in investment into different regions. But would that actually put a stopper on that if we moved to more of a remote setup? And would it mean that, you know, people from other people were sort of moving into different regional locations and actually moving out into the countryside? What would those impacts be? I think it's just interesting to kind of explore and think about. I think from my project management background, I'm always thinking about what can go wrong, basically. So yeah, some interesting ideas to explore. But then this is something that I really wanted to cover with you as well, because I think obviously we've had to deal with a lot from the lockdown situation, but actually remote working, it is something that we've always had to do, and it's something that you'll definitely come across in your professional lives. So we find when we're working with clients that there's just always compromises that you've got to make. You'll have like an idea of how you want to approach something and what your ideal will be in terms of the research that you want to do and the level of detail you want to go into. But when you're working in a professional environment with a client, they will want you to kind of take more of a lean UX approach, so doing just enough to get the output that they're looking for, and really not go into as much detail, but really tailor it and make it very succinct and to the point, and you know, getting those insights across as succinctly and clearly as possible. A big thing that comes into that is definitely the client budget. So in Orange Bus, certainly, and I think this is true of most sort of digital agencies or consultancies, the client will pay for travel and accommodation and any expenses. So things like if you're going to incentivize your users, which we normally do, so we would provide, say, like a £50 Amazon voucher, or it might be more if it was a more kind of harder to reach user group, then that would come out of the client's budget. Also, like traveling, if you're wanting to reach a sort of geographical spread of people, that's important to the client, or you're needing to, like, their client base or their user group base is, you know, somewhere else far away from where you are, you'll want to actually travel there to be in person, and you might have to stay over. So all of those costs just really add up for the client. So often what you have to do when you're planning your approach is, you know, negotiate with the client and see if that's possible, and if you can negotiate that with them. And if not, then it's looking at, well, what's the compromise then? And often that will be, well, you know, we might go down to the organisation to shadow the staff in that organisation and do the stakeholder interviews and things, but actually for the user interviews, we will carry that out remotely and use screen share technology, or video, or just a phone number as well, and just having the voice. So you have to kind of make those compromises. And then another thing that can affect it as well is the timescales and deadlines. So often the client they might have the budget, but they have a very tight timescale that they're working towards, and that's usually due to we're often kind of conducting research to feed into a business case for a client, so that we can do the discovery phase and learn what the pain points are and where the opportunities are. And they basically want to feed that information into a business case to develop or improve their product or service. So if they've got like a time in mind for when they need to submit a business case to their business leads or to like an external funder or something like that, then we have to work to those timescales. And a lot of the time, the client will think things take a lot less time than they actually do. So they'll come to us quite late in the process, and it's kind of navigating that with them and looking at, right, what can we achieve for them? Other things that are challenging can be like just getting people in the room as well. So if we're wanting to run a workshop with the different project stakeholders, just bringing their diaries together can be quite challenging. So it might mean that we have had times in the past where we have just had to do things remotely because we've not been able to make it work. But I can literally, pre-COVID, I can only think of 1, maybe 2 times tops where I've ever kind of had that. So normally we do make it work, but it's just a kind of challenge to overcome. And then, silos as well. So having situations where people aren't communicating and there's different teams in an organization that aren't working together on something. So it just slows the entire process down and means that we might not end up speaking to everybody that we need to over the course of that time. So when we're down in an organization, trying to cover as much ground as possible and shadow and talk to the different departments that support that service and support the customer experience, we might miss something and then have to conduct more of a remote session in order to fill the gaps later. And that sort of leads into the not having the full picture. So we often find that when we're talking to a client about a project, we'll have those initial conversations and then we'll plan an approach from that. But it's really important to kind of constantly have your eyes open for things that you might have missed, basically. So we find that we have to be quite flexible and adaptable when we're undertaking discovery projects, because there's often things that haven't been communicated by the sort of the stakeholder that you're dealing with. And you might uncover that further down the line, there's a massive thing that we've missed that we haven't included in the approach, or actually taking a slightly different approach would be better and deliver more value for the client. So having that ability to think about what could go wrong and what you do in those situations and how you would navigate that conversation with the client, because change is absolutely fine. And if you need to change your approach in order to get the best result, that is something that, you know, that's a good thing that's happened. Like, change isn't a bad thing in that instance, and you should go ahead with that. But it's how you navigate that change. So you can't just sort of like shift your entire approach when you're working with a client who has expectations of you. So you probably have like a signed contract, or we call it a statement of work, where you've kind of documented the scope of that project and how you're going to approach it and what deliverables the client will get. But if you are going to change that, you need to agree that with the client in advance before you do, basically. So you just need to communicate what your reasoning is and have a very solid, cohesive plan for why you're doing that and what you're going to do going forward. And you know, that's fine. That's a real sort of skill to have in a professional setting. So I think if you're kind of going ahead with these projects, and this is all kind of quite new and different, it's going to happen in a remote setting instead of in person. It's actually a really good opportunity to kind of experience some of the challenges that you would come across anyway. If you were working for a sort of consultancy or design agency, not having the full picture and having to make compromises and having to adapt and get the most insight you can out in a compromise situation is a really, really good skill to have. and also being flexible and adaptable, and being able to change your approach and explain why you're doing that will also serve you really well, I think, in your sort of professional life. So I am going to deep dive a little bit more into approaches now. I think a lot of you have either just completed your approach planning, or maybe are sort of looking to do that, and how you're going to approach your different projects. So I really wanted to kind of focus on that a little bit, because in the remote workshops that I've been running, we've definitely had, we've taken a lot of learnings from that. So I was meant to be facilitating a workshop in person in London in sort of the end of March time, and we had to move that to a digital setting, so using Miro for that instead. And the one thing that was sort of the most important was definitely that kind of planning and preparation. We were finding that the activities that we'd planned, they maybe weren't quite fit for a remote, like doing that in a remote session, so we had to kind of adapt them a little bit. And also it meant that we had to kind of like make Miro templates and things, so that they were able to kind of do those activities and have templates and worksheets and things. So yeah, we found that preparation really important, and then learn afterwards as well that it's really good to kind of hone in on the activities that you're looking at doing, and maybe looking at actually doing less and streamlining it, and really tailoring your activities so you're going to get the most value from it. We did a full day at the time, which was fine, but it was quite intense. And I think what we've learned now, and what we're sort of actively doing, is splitting workshops down into smaller chunks. So maybe just doing like a couple of hours, but a few sessions instead. And really just cutting down on the activities, and being flexible as well if something isn't working on the day. So yeah, it's been interesting, because I think running those sessions remotely, like I can share the blog I wrote on it, which goes into a bit more detail on it, but the hardest thing was definitely like the lack of body language, being able to like read the room, and having those like little conversations. Normally you'd be kind of walking around, if people were doing individual activities, walking around and being able to kind of prompt them and have conversations, and identify if they were getting it, or if they were struggling and we needed to like change course. It's much harder to do that. So I think having a lot more preparation in advance, but also really challenging why you're doing something is really is quite useful to have a think about. So what I've done here is we're not going to go through this or use this today, but this is like an example of an approach template that we use quite a lot. So we've got our challenge here. So we'd usually use this as like a how might we statement. We've got the goals for the research that we're wanting to undertake. We'll also write down what we know already. If we've got any existing research from a client, we'll pop that in there. We'll identify the gaps and what we still need to find out. And then we'll think about, so this is like the activities. So how could we do that? How could we fill those gaps? What activities and approach could we take? And then we've got sort of our user groups and who we need to learn from. So this might be users, it might be competitors that we want to either speak with or speak to the people who use those products. Sector best practice, and also the best practice in other industries as well is really useful to learn from. So doing some desk research. And we often also look at sort of stories of failure as well. So where things have failed and not gone to plan, and what learnings we can take from that. So as well as doing your kind of qualitative research as well, there's lots of other kind of areas of inquiry you can take. And obviously the desk research, it is sort of, it works very well remotely because you just need yourself and a computer really. So then thinking about how will we find these people that we want to speak to, what's our recruitment approach? Are there any dependencies on this working out? Any constraints and things that we know we won't be able to do? And then I've also put planned deliverables as well, because I don't think you can ever say 100% these are going to be your deliverables at the sort of approach planning stage. You can have a best guess at what you think you're going to produce, but you actually have to kind of see what insights are coming out and really consider your audience. So they might change as you kind of going through a project, we often find. So just to kind of like help drill down into that a little bit, I'd sort of encourage you to question the activities that you're doing, and is it actually the right activity, and how do you know that? But especially with the deliverables. So this is something that we do all the time, basically thinking about who is the audience that's going to receive it. So for you, obviously, you'll be thinking about, oh, who's going to mark your work? But if you kind of put yourself in that hypothetical zone of it, you know, if I was doing this for my business or for my client, like who would my audience be? And what are their goals? What do they do in their day-to-day job? So it's almost like making sort of a persona, really, and really considering what would they want this deliverable for? How is it going to help them achieve their goals and help them make their jobs easier? And also thinking about, so if these are the deliverables we're planning that we think are going to meet these things here, how are they actually going to be used as well? I think I've certainly seen a lot of kind of persona templates and things that are created and just sort of shoved away in a folder, filed away, and just never looked at or used. So actually thinking about, okay, I've got this deliverable and I think it's going to meet the goal for the audience, and I think they're going to be interested in it. It's going to be presented in a way that's best sort of consumed by them. So for example, thinking about how much detail you go into for different audiences as well. Some people really will want to drill down into that detail, whereas others just want a kind of executive summary of what the insights are and the key opportunities. But if you can think about making a deliverable that's actually really usable by a team in that organization and something that they can constantly refer to and use in their day-to-day jobs, that's kind of where they come into play, really, and where you know you've sort of done a good job with choosing that deliverable. And then the last thing I think it's really valuable to consider, especially if you facilitating remotely as well, is avoiding risk. So really thinking about what could go wrong. So obviously with the workshop that I did, for me it was definitely sort of tech issues. There was someone who was having a real a problem. Sort of they could hear us, but they couldn't speak. Their mic wasn't working, even though they'd used the software before and we'd done like a tech test with them before. So things just crop up on the day that you probably know they're going to happen, but you haven't maybe thought about how you'll handle it. So luckily for me, I was running the session with somebody else as well, and we had a WhatsApp group because we were running the session on Teams, and we didn't want to use the same like software basically to communicate, just in case we accidentally sent like a message into the group chat or something like that. So we were using WhatsApp, and I just sort of sent her a message and said, oh, would you mind kind of phoning them up and like trying to talk them through it individually? So it just having that kind of in our back pockets just sort of helped us sort the situation out, rather than it being very distracting for the rest of the group. So yeah, having to think about risk and things like that. So what I thought we'd do now is sort of thinking about the kind of fears. I know, like, going into your projects now, you must have got a lot of thoughts around, you know, how is it going to go? Am I going to be missing out on something? You know, what could go wrong, basically, and you might be sort of feeling concerned about that, or have some worries about how you'll approach it. So when you're kind of thinking about the risks and what could go wrong, it's sometimes useful to kind of use a bit of a framework to work through that. So this is a sort of activity from game storming. which is, I've got like the book, but there's a website as well with resources on there. So definitely recommend going and checking that out. But this is for basically training your brain to think through a problem in a sort of systemic way. So just sort of focusing on the questions and the sort of areas of inquiry first, then focusing on the answers, and then moving back to questions and back to answers. So it works quite well in a group setting if you're kind of wanting to really focus the discussion on really solving and focusing in on a problem. But you can also use it by yourself as well, just to kind of like train your brain into that way of thinking and that way of operating. So it's called the squid because it kind of looks a bit like a squid when you like build the diagram out. So I've got a little example here. So you might be worried about running a co-design workshop during a pandemic. What's going to happen in that situation? What are the risks going to be, and how could I solve those risks? So thinking about some key sort of questions around that, and then moving into the answers, but moving from so not kind of what your brain will do is it'll go straight to the answers. So you'll think of a question, then you'll immediately want to answer it, but it's making yourself really focus on all of the questions first, and then all of the answers, and not going down this route too quickly, but more sort of in that horizontal manner. So I'm going to ask you to spend 5 minutes just jotting down the different sort of fears and risks you sort of think you have with your project approaches, if that's all right. Did something pop up then? Oh, cool. I'll set the timer. Oh, my own one. There we go.
Hannah, could you enlarge the instructions on your screen?
Yes.
Thanks.
Timer's kind of in the way.
Yeah.
Yeah, for this first bit, we're literally just kind of jotting down some fears. So just point number 1, fears, challenges, or topics. Have people got some fears written down?
I suppose one of the fears is that everybody's gone away.
That's definitely one of my fears.
It's difficult doing this, isn't it, without any feedback?
Yeah, so the sessions that I've run have generally been on Miro, but they've been quite small groups of people. But all you kind of have to go on is the cursor and seeing how people are engaging with the template and things like that. And then there was someone who just wasn't doing anything and just went completely quiet. So I sort of messaged them separately because I didn't want to call them out on the call or anything. And just like checked that they were okay. And they were literally just like, they wanted to do it on paper instead,
right.
And then upload it, which totally makes sense. But it's just really hard to like, normally you can read that room and see the body language and just go and like have conversations and check on people. But you don't have, well, on this, you've not got anything really, have you? But on Miro, you've just got that cursor.
Yeah. It's hard work talking when there's no audience. I mean, there is an audience, but you just don't know whether actually people are nodding along or.
So, do we have some fears then? Thumbs up emoji if you do. Is anyone completely lost?
Any volunteers? Before I volunteer people?
You can choose someone.
Well, the people at the top. Sorry, go on.
What we'll maybe do is like if we want to kind of, if you want to have a go at sort of sketching out, if you've got some paper, sketching out that diagram, if you sort of feeling comfortable with it, and then maybe someone can talk through like how they found going through that process. That sounds all right.
Mm-hmm.
So I'll set it again just for another 5 minutes. But yeah, if anyone has any questions or they're finding it difficult or anything, just feel free.
Just indicate that you're actually still there.
Yeah. If anyone finishes before the timer goes off as well, also feel free to shout up. So I think so this activity, obviously you can use it for like drilling into things that you think might go wrong and identifying risks and possible solutions and how else you could approach that. But you can also use it for like questioning the approach that you're taking as well, and just really kind of drilling into that and challenging it a bit. I've also included just underneath, which we'll not run through today, but like I'll send this this Miro board around in case anyone wants to like take screenshots or anything, and leave it open for like 5 days or something like that. But yeah, it's the sort of prioritization matrix. So looking at the impact versus effort. So when you're kind of choosing your activities or you're looking at what deliverables you're going to produce, we often use that matrix for like prioritizing opportunities and the work that we're going to do with a client going forward. But you can actually just use it if you really want to sort of question the approach that you're taking and the deliverables you're producing, and looking at what's going to add the most value, but maybe not not take up as much effort, basically. So you can, I think there's like different tools that you're very familiar with, using them in certain ways, but actually they can be kind of repurposed for the different times in your project.
I'm reading Ken Kosienda's book at the moment, Creative Selection, which I recommend to everybody. I'm hoping that he'll come and do a talk for us. But he's the person who designed the keyboard for iOS.
Oh, right.
And he's explaining all the process that they went through. And the chapter I just finished was about the difference between, using your gut instinct versus the sort of, and that was the Apple approach versus the Google approach, where they literally tested, 100 different shades of blue to decide what you want to use for links. And he said that's the difference between creatives, designers versus engineers. That engineers want lots of data, but creatives are very much about experience.
Yeah.
But I like approaches like this because they're also useful for, I think, I mean, you might disagree with this, but they're useful for justifying to people like clients that there is a rationale behind what might actually be quite an instinctive judgment. Yeah. That they can see that there's a process that's being followed, and therefore if they've got a problem with the decision, they need to figure out where in the, what assumptions were wrong maybe. So it's almost like it's clarifying what actually might be quite a very quick and instinctive set of decisions.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's twofold. On one hand, that's something that we definitely have to do on a regular basis when we're working in this setting with clients, is you do find that you're having to justify why you're doing things a lot of the time. And sadly as well, the user research often suffers for that. Trying to kind of justify and explain why it's so important to do that user research can be quite challenging. So that's a real skill, is like having that justification and that ability to negotiate with a client and like persuade them and make them see the value in doing it, which often means more compromise, kind of doing things on a smaller scale to kind of physically demonstrate that value to them. But then I think also putting ourselves in this remote situation as well has also made us, there's a lot of things that we do sort of naturally anyway, so we do it more instinctively, but we've had to kind of go back to the drawing board a little bit in the remote session and really like think about the activities that we're doing a lot more and really drill into it a lot more. So it's been interesting to kind of go back and look at the sort of theory behind things and why question like our own approach and way of doing things as well a bit. Cool. So does anyone feel comfortable sort of sharing how they approached that and what the process they went through, how they felt the activity was? Was it difficult? Was it useful?
I messaged, there we go, Zidan. It's good.
Sorry, I didn't write down on my screen. I just write down on a piece of paper. Is that okay?
That's absolutely fine, yeah. Yeah, we don't have to share it or anything. It's more just about like how you found the process, really.
Okay. like, because my project topic is related to the community pub, and I want to explore like the science of community belonging through a pub. So maybe if I run a workshop online, it could be about the run a workshop, a remote workshop with the pub staff. So like I want to explore, like my goal is I want to explore like the social behavior and some changes and in effects in the context of a community pub. So that's my goal of the workshop. And my starting question is, how might I help them to participate a remote workshop if they don't familiar with the online tools? Yeah, that's my started question. And also I'm a little curious about how might I ask them to understand my tool during the workshop. And yeah, that's the question mode. And I think the answer mode is like maybe I can just send my engagement tool through the email just by a simple image, and can enlighten their interest to participate in my workshop. But I didn't think too much interesting ways to encourage them to participate in my workshop. And it also could be one of my fears about to organize an online workshop.
Yeah, I think that's definitely a challenge. Some people take really well to Miro. It can be quite intuitive for some people, whereas others, especially I think if people don't come from a design background, they find it quite difficult navigating around the board and getting used to the kind of zooming in and zooming out. People are sort of much more used to a kind of traditional document that they work through, rather than that kind of dragging and dropping and navigating that way. So what we did at the start of our workshop, we shared the Miro board in advance and sort of instructions on how to log into it as well. We did a sort of test call, which is something we do at the start of our interviews. If we do remote interviews with people, we test the screen share software is working and they've got it installed properly in advance. So we've kind of just applied that to remote workshops now as well. So making sure that they can access Miro and that they're signed up. Because I think if you're working with a small group, having their name on the cursor is really important. So you can see sort of who's where on the board and you're not kind of losing people. Whereas if you've got a larger group on the board, it's sometimes good to like hide the cursors, because otherwise it looks like it's like little ants going at the screen. But we also did like a sort of Miro 101 at the start of each session as well, and like made a little playground for participants so they could get used to like basically doing a few tasks and sort of get used to drawing and uploading something. So we gave them homework in advance of the session and asked them to bring that. So they uploaded that. And then they kind of learned to navigate. So we dedicated like the first 15 or so minutes of the session to just kind of taking them through the playground and getting them to like just get familiar with the tool as well. But you could do that in the test call actually as well, if you wanted to save a bit more time.
Yeah, because like I have talked with some like pub landlord and pub staff, and most of them, like when I ask them like which way is more convenient for you, and most of them will just answer me like I would rather to do that through a regular phone call, because they didn't quite accessible to the like Skype or Zoom, that tools. So that's my fear and worries about my question.
That they won't be comfortable using the tool, and you'll have to do it just on the phone call. Yeah, I think in that case, that's sort of like when we're doing our interviews, and we have had times where we have just had to use phone calls, and especially on FSCS as well, because we were working with quite vulnerable people at times. They definitely felt much more comfortable on a phone call. So it is that sort of compromise, accepting that you're not going to get the full picture, and there's going to be things that you miss out on, but you're still able to get a lot of insight from that. So don't feel too concerned about it, because you can get a lot of qualitative insight from, as long as you've got a very well structured discussion guide and you sort of comfortable being a bit flexible with that and letting the discussion go in the right direction, but also keeping it focused on the topic. You will get good amounts of insight from that. But then I also suppose now that the pubs are reopening a little bit, if you feel comfortable, maybe you could go and spend some time shadowing in the pubs.
Yeah, I will do that.
But yeah, I suppose if you were wanting to do workshops, maybe you could just offer to sort of say, oh, I totally understand if you're not feeling confident, using these tools, that's absolutely fine, and we can just do it on a phone call. But actually, would you mind kind of giving me 10 minutes of your time just to sort of talk you through it and just see how you feel about it? And if they've kind of seen it themselves, they might feel more comfortable to do that.
Oh, okay, I see. So like, if I want to encourage them to try, so maybe the first time is not need too long time. So maybe just spend like 10 or 15 minutes to let them to have a try.
Yeah, I think sometimes when people, rather than like on email, when they speak to you face to face or over the phone, they often kind of warm up a little bit more and they're more sort of willing to try things. Like generally people don't want to say no, generally. So they will sort of, try and accommodate the tool that you wanted to use, but it's just that people can feel out of depth and out of their comfort zone, especially with Miro. So yeah, I think it's worth trying. Like they can only say no at the end of the day. So just see if they're willing to have a 10-minute conversation with you about it, where you can you've got that space to sort of try and persuade them, or at least just show them what it is and make them feel a bit more comfortable with it.
I see. Thank you.
Is there I'm wondering, Hannah, if there's also a sort of a tone that you take when approaching people, because I know I've seen a few students sort of emails to people asking them to participate, and they're almost apologetic and sort of, I don't want to disturb you, etc., etc. And I'm just wondering if actually offering that choice is sort of not taking control of the situation. Is there a way that you approach people that sort of gives a sense of authority, but without sort of frightening people off?
Yeah, so we wouldn't sort of be apologetic necessarily when we're sending emails out like that. Recruitment's a really hard one, actually. So we will often actually use a recruitment agency, which I know isn't going to be a possibility in this scenario. So when that is the case, that's really great for us, because they kind of handle all of that side of it. But when we're doing the recruitment ourselves, we basically just present it as an invite. So I think it also helps with us that we will have an incentive for them. You can come across more authoritative because they're going to get something out of it. But I think, there is also the side that they're feeling like they're doing some good as well. So they want to invest in the improvement of an experience, or for yourselves, you can kind of think of a way that it would benefit them. But also that, people will be more up for kind of helping sort of students like yourselves going through this. And I'd say reach out to the networks that as well. If you can make a kind of briefing sheet, so we normally will provide an information sheet to people where we're talking about what the research is that we're doing. When I say information sheet, it literally just 1 page, maybe 2 pages tops, with just a few headings, like what what is the research study? Why are we conducting this research? Who do we want to speak to? What's the ask for them? So how long will they be required? What will they get for it? What's the type of activity we'll be doing? But it's literally just sentences, so quite short and snappy. And then we might also include some of the kind of GDPR consent information as well on that sheet. And we'll provide that, we'll attach it to any email that we send to participants that we're reaching out to directly. But we'll also send that out to like some of our networks. So I mentioned like we obviously have our company Slack channel. So we'll post out in there and say, we're looking for, teachers or like, whatever the user group is. So it'll be maybe like primary school teachers who have worked on this specific thing. Does anybody know anybody who fits into that sort of user group? And a lot of people, they'll have family members or friends maybe that are teachers in a primary school, and they'll be able to reach out to. And also just, so if you kind of get that out there with your university networks, but also like give it to your mum and dad and say, would you mind posting this in, like sending an email around to your colleagues, give it to your friends and say, would you mind passing this on? Just get it out there as far reaching as you can, like post it on LinkedIn, on social media. It's sort of surprising how many people know different people. But yeah, the tone generally, it's much more around an invite to participate, and these are the kinds of people we're looking for, and saying things like, if you're able to help us. So you are saying help and words like that, but you're not apologizing for the research that you're doing. You're kind of presenting it in, I'm doing something for the good of this business or organization or whatever it is that you're doing it for. And potentially if you can articulate why it would be useful to that participant as well, that's a bonus.
So that's all really, really good advice. So instead of starting off by saying, I'm a student doing a project, can you help me? It's, I want to help reinvigorate the local community.
Exactly that.
I want to help people come out of the coronavirus lockdown in a positive or whatever. So it's sort of like a spin on things.
Yeah, like lead with that, definitely.
What's it for you?
Provide like specific information about what's required of them, and then it's fine to say that you're a student, but don't kind of lead with that. Lead with what it is that you're wanting to achieve.
Great, good. I don't suppose you have got any copies of any of those sheets, briefing sheets, or anything that you're able to share?
Yeah, I can probably put that in there as a template as well today.
Okay. Excellent.
I'll make a note. But yeah, that's pretty much me done for the day then. Does anyone else have any questions?
You can all turn on your video now, just to prove you're still with us. I think actually I can turn people's video on for them, but I won't do that. Any questions for Hannah? No? I'm surprised. I had a couple. Just get my notebook. So I just want to ask a question about. We do have someone still with us. Hello. When you were talking about the difficulty getting people together and diaries clashing and that sort of thing. One of our graduates from last year is working with Scottish Government, and she wrote a really interesting blog post recently about her first few months working in Scottish Government as a service designer. And she was very honest in that blog post. And she was talking about how she discovered that a lot of people didn't necessarily value what it was she was trying to do. And I was wondering if the difficulty in getting people together is genuinely that people are very busy and stuff like that, or is it that there's an issue about those shared values, that if you're not connecting to something that they think is important, that they're not necessarily going to make time for it, whereas if they did value it, they would make time for it. Is that a reflection of maybe the sort of project you're being asked to do, or maybe just the idea of customer service, or improving some aspect of customer service, that sort of thing?
Yeah, I think it's a combination. So a lot of the people that we're speaking to will be quite senior stakeholders, so they might be CEOs, CTOs, chief information officers, operational officers, whatever, and they are just really, really busy. Like, they want to contribute, but they are super, super busy. But then you've also got situations where it's one senior stakeholder who is really driving the project, and is really passionate about it and really wants to make it happen. But we find that a lot of organizations that we work with that are quite traditional organizations, they tend to have that siloed effect. So people working in very different teams and not collaborating together. And it's more like her sort of trying to collaborate those different diaries and get people bought into the project, and just kind of connecting those moving parts, basically. But I think it is a really good point that a lot of my job is trying to influence and negotiate and convince people of the value of the work that we do, and that literally goes from right through to working with the sales team when they're kind of selling the approach initially and selling what it is that we offer. A lot of people they'll look at it and they'll be like, why are we spending so much money on discovery? What's all this user research lark? Like, why do we need that? We've got analytics. Why do we need to do qualitative research as well? Some people really get it, but for a lot of people, you have to do a lot of work explaining why that's the process that you need to go through. And then there's the added pressure at that point as well of, if you've managed to convince them to do it, then you've got to show what the value of that is as well. So when you're going through the project, keeping them really involved in the approach is really important. And being able to demonstrate that value quickly and not just leaving it till the end of the project, but getting early insights to them as well, all the way through. So yeah, a lot of my job is less the kind of doing of the work, and more the kind of getting the client bought into it and making sure everyone's working towards a cohesive direction, everyone's bought in and everything's moving forward smoothly, and that people are bought into that approach.
Great, thank you. I've got another question, but I'm sure there are some students who have questions. So Zidane is asking a question in the chat, apologising for having a question. There you go. Stop being apologetic. So based on your experience, any differences to run a remote workshop with the goal of exploring insights and with the goal of ideation and validating?
So ideation, that was actually an activity that I have run remotely recently, and for the most part it did work quite well. So we did it in the sort of method of we came up with some how might we statements or challenge statements based on what we knew about the client. We'd already done the as-is work with them, so we'd already done the research to understand the as-is service, and we were moving more into right, we're going to start to look at that to-be journey now and putting that to-be service blueprint together. So let's run a workshop that's all around the vision of the future for them and where they want to go, but also around looking at some of the key pain points and opportunities that came out of that as-is work, and how can we sort of come up with some ideas that we can then take away and feed back into that to-be solution. So we took the approach of having those how might we statements that had come up from the research, and then we had like a warm-up activity, because I think that that's something that definitely comes across in when you're working remotely. It's much harder to build that rapport up with somebody. Normally you'd get people coffees and there'd be food and you'd sort of naturally chat, but especially if you don't know the client very well, or if it's quite a new group of people coming together, it's quite hard to get that rapport. So doing something a bit fun at the start of the session so you can get to know people a bit better. So we actually sort of took on the whole like pandemic issue that was going on at the time and said, right, if you had to leave your house at the last minute because of an apocalypse or something like that, go away and grab like one object that you would take with you if you were going to leave the house. So I went and grabbed my cat. But it's just interesting seeing what different people kind of pick up, and you get to know them a little bit better because they talk about why they've chosen that object. And it just kind of got everyone stood up a little bit and the blood flowing, and just got everybody a little bit more comfortable sharing ideas. I think it's very easy to have people going, off camera, but partly because of bandwidth issues, but also because they don't feel comfortable. They want to kind of like hide in a group situation. Sometimes you have the opposite situation and you've got really confident people who are talking all over each other, and you're having to sort of try and, be assertive and kind of calm it down. But I've definitely been in one session where it's been like pulling teeth trying to get people to participate. So one thing that's definitely useful there is having examples in your head that you can pull on and sort of talk about to get the ideas flowing a bit more. We were finding that people, because they were so caught up in their day-to-day jobs of what they do, they were very short-term in how they were thinking, and they were just thinking about the kind of problems that they face, and it was very, very granular, detailed, short-term thinking that they were coming up with. So we were having to do a lot of work to kind of think about the art of the possible. And at this stage we're more about as many ideas as possible, thinking big, and then we'll drill down into the detail and like what actually is possible at that point. We ran it in quite a sort of traditional design thinking way. We've got those how might we statements. We did a warm-up. We ran through some of the insights that had come out of the research, and then we got them to basically post-it note as many different ideas as possible and kind of rotate around the how might we statements. So we had a template up there. And then we did a voting exercise. So you can have little dots on Miro, or there is like functionality, I think, as well, that allows you to do voting on Miro. So we then looked at the top sort of 3 for each problem statement. So what had people voted up? We discussed those in a little bit more detail. And then we created templates for people to kind of storyboard out what those ideas would look like a bit more. So this is actually where we did get some learnings, because some people did it on paper and some people used Miro to do that. I think the people that actually used Miro, it took them a lot more time. They got quite distracted by the different tools and making it look pretty, basically. So actually, I'd probably recommend getting people to just sketch things on paper themselves, and then they can take a picture of it and upload it. And that works quite well. So Miro is obviously so powerful. It's got so much potential and so much good that you can do with it. But I think when you're in that kind of design thinking, ideation mindset, it's more about sketching things quickly and not worrying about the detail too much and making it look too pretty. So sometimes Miro can be a bad thing in that sense.
I see.
And I suppose the other thing that goes with that, though, as well, is a workshop the thing to do. So if you going back to your first framework, where you're saying, what am I trying to achieve here? And it was interesting that Zidan's answer to that was to get people comfortable with an online, with Miro or whatever. But actually, the purpose is to find out certain types of information or something like that. So the question then would be, well, is a workshop the appropriate tool for that, or would an interview be the appropriate tool for that? And how could I do that interview in different formats? when they're coming back and saying, well, I'd be more comfortable with the phone, that rather than that be your plan B, that might have been actually one of your plans A, because you realized that a one-to-one chat might be more comfortable. So I think one of the problems we've had in the past is people doing something like a workshop because they think they have to do a workshop, and it's not always the most appropriate method for the type of thing you're trying to find out, or the people you're trying to work with.
Yeah, definitely. I'm just reading, someone's posted another question as well around running the differences between running a workshop with user groups and with stakeholders. So yeah, the templates that I've shared there, they probably wouldn't be used in a workshop setting or an interview setting necessarily. They're more for your own personal use when you're kind of planning the approach that you're going to take, or you want to take a step back and reassess whether you've made the right decisions, or whether you want to drill down into your approach and maybe look to pivot if things aren't quite working out as planned, or if you want to really think about what could go wrong in advance, especially in this remote situation that we're in. It's probably more likely that things are going to go wrong, so just kind of preparing for that in advance. Differences between running a workshop with user groups and with stakeholders, there's definitely a big difference. With stakeholders, they're very they're time poor, so they tend to want to have shorter sessions with you that are a lot more focused. It's just a different tone, I think. They're kind of bought into a project, they're paying you for your time basically, so they want you to be succinct and to the point, but they also want to get excited about the project. It's often quite a big thing for a company to invest lots of different teams' time in something, so coming together and making it feel like a really exciting thing that we're going to embark on together, and making it feel as collaborative as possible is really key for stakeholders. And just making them feel like they're part of it, like we're not coming in and telling them this is what we're going to do, like making them feel like they're part of shaping it is really important. And then with users, obviously you've still got to have the same kind of energy, but it's more a kind of, I think if it's incentivized, it's more of a two-way transaction. So they're helping you by you're sort of getting the insights from them, but ultimately you're also helping them in a way because they're getting something for it, so they're getting incentivized to take part in it. I suppose the differences of actually running the session, you've still got to be as professional in both settings. It's more, I think it's just more the tone really. You'll have a more maybe empathetic tone, and you're really trying to get to know the users. It's much more of using your kind of research skills with a user run workshop, whereas with a stakeholder workshop it's more about getting them bought in and setting a direction for the project, I would say. Good question though.
Yep. Any other questions?
Hi, I want to ask, so how long it usually takes for this like remote online workshop?
So I think that really varies on the type of workshop and the purpose of the workshop. When I've run workshops, generally they've tended to be a day, and remotely we did a day-long workshop, and it was intense. It's very intense. It's very draining for everybody. So I would probably recommend splitting it into smaller chunks if you can. So you know, either just really focusing down on the activities that you're doing and having a workshop that lasts maybe like 2 hours tops or something like that, or if you feel like you're going to need more, do that over the space of a few days. But generally within a couple of hours you should have, you know, managed to get some insight and kind of covered quite a bit of ground in that time. But yeah, I mean, you can definitely go for the full day, but it's just be prepared.
Yeah. did you have like reward after they finished the whole thing?
A reward for me or for the participants?
Yeah, sorry for the participant. Yeah.
We did sort of think about this like a sort of after celebration, but because it was it wasn't like the end of the project that we were in, we actually decided it would probably be best just to let people go. So the way we finished it was just, we always ask people for feedback at the end of a session. So we got them to post-it note, their feedback on how the session went so that we could learn from that the next time. So just, generally, did they learn something from it? Did they think the activities were run well? Did they take something away from it? Or did they feel like it was a waste of their time? Because that's, for a stakeholder workshop, that's the worst kind of situation, is if someone hasn't felt like they've got some value from it. So we asked them for that. And I think if it had been like towards the end of a project, or it had been like a retro or something like that, then maybe we would have had like a little social afterwards, and maybe had like a couple of drinks or something after, and just had like more of a social chat just to get to know each other a little bit better. But I think for the type of workshop that one was in particular, it being a full day, and we were just like, I think everyone needs to go and do their own thing now.
Sure. Thank you. Yes.
Any other questions? The point I wanted to make to everybody on this is that obviously you're all thinking about your stage 3 project, but your stage 3 project is hopefully teaching you about these things. So it's your reflection on how you go about your project will also help you when you go out into your careers. There was an article yesterday which I posted onto Twitter and the LinkedIn group with people talking about how to get a job as a service designer. So Sarah Drummond and other people were asked to contribute to that. And they were saying, just show us 1 to 3 projects, but don't show us the project. Show us that you can talk about the project and how you and your process. And that was the important thing they're interested in. So the questions about, how do you deal with this? How do you deal with that? Mm-hmm. And so if something goes wrong, which it might do, that's not a reason not to do it. It's a reason to do it and learn from what went wrong. And when it comes to assessment, if you can understand why something went wrong and what you would do differently, you're gonna end up with a better grade than if you can't understand why it went wrong or why something just happened to go right. It's we're looking for that process, that understanding of the process.
And that's the same when we're recruiting as well. We always look at not what somebody did, but how they approached it. Especially those kind of problem solving skills are really important, and it's all about how you go about something. And also exactly what Jonathan just said, if something goes wrong, because things go wrong all the time in a professional setting as well, and we have to pivot and change the approach that we're taking and the deliverables that we're producing, because it's just, things are so uncertain at the start of a project, and as you go through, you start to define that, wade through that complexity, and things become more defined. So it's natural that things are going to change, and what you actually produce to get the best outcome for the client is going to change. So being able to adapt to that and approach things in that kind of open, flexible way, but also having the rigor of why you're doing that as well, why you've made that decision is super important. So being able to articulate the approaches that you've taken and how you've solved problems and how you've learned from mistakes is definitely a big factor.